The dusty planet of Korath was known for its vast desert landscapes and its bustling markets. But today, the air was thick with tension as the crowd gathered at the spaceport's central square. Merchants, warriors, and traders from across the galaxy came to this place for one reason: to bid on rare goods. Some came for valuable artifacts, others for exotic creatures. But today, the auction was different. Lyra, a small girl of about 10 years old, stood with her mother, Alara, at the center of the bustling crowd. They were surrounded by people who didn't care about them, only about the rare commodity that was being offered. Alara, a woman with soft eyes and strong hands, had a reputation across the galaxy for her cooking. Her meals were like nothing anyone had ever tasted, and there were whispers that she had the power to cook dishes that could change lives. But today, Alara was not offering a new recipe. She wasn't offering a special dish or a rare ingredient. She was being sold. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she clutched her mother's hand. She looked up at Alara, whose face was calm, but Lyra could see the worry in her eyes. They had no choice. The auction was their only hope. "Please, please, someone bid for my mom. She'll cook you the most delicious meals," Lyra shouted, her voice breaking through the noise of the crowd. The auctioneer, a tall, thin man with a sharp suit, called for silence as he raised his hand. His voice rang out, amplified by the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a rare offer. A woman known throughout the galaxy for her culinary skills. Alara, a chef of unmatched talent, is up for bid. One meal from her, and you'll never want to eat anything else again. Who will start the bidding?" Lyra's eyes scanned the crowd desperately. She didn't understand how it had come to this. Just a few months ago, they had been living a peaceful life on their home planet. But then the war came. The raiders attacked, and everything changed. Alara had been captured, and Lyra had been forced to watch as her mother was taken away. Her skills traded for protection. Now they were here, in a place they never should have been. A murmur spread through the crowd, and Lyra's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't leave her mother behind. Not again. A man in the back of the crowd raised his hand. "I'll offer 10,000 credits," he called out, his voice cold and calculating. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed. 10,000 credits, can I hear 15? Lyra's heart sank. She had hoped for a kind soul to step forward, someone who would take them away from this horrible place. But the men and women around her seemed more interested in the price than in Alara's skills. As the bidding continued, a new figure stepped forward, cutting through the crowd. He was tall, dressed in a simple but well-worn military uniform. His face was hard, his eyes dark and brooding. He didn't seem to care about the auction at all. His gaze locked onto Alara as he made his way toward the front. 20,000 credits, the man said, his voice deep and steady. His words silenced the crowd. Everyone turned to look at him. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the offer. 20,000, he repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "You're offering that much for a chef?" The man nodded, his eyes still fixed on Alara. "She's not just a chef," he said quietly. "I can tell." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. There was something about this man that felt different. He wasn't here for a meal. He wasn't interested in buying Alara's cooking for profit. His gaze was full of something else. Something deeper. The auctioneer smiled, his eyes glinting with greed. 20,000 credits going once, I'll take her, the man said, cutting him off. "No need for the auction. I'll pay double." The crowd gasped. The auctioneer blinked, clearly thrown off by the sudden offer. "Double?" he asked, trying to hide the surprise in his voice. "Well, in that case, I believe we have a deal. 20,000 credits then. The chef is yours, sir." Without hesitation, the man stepped forward and handed over the credits. It was all too quick, too sudden for Lyra to understand. She looked at her mother, whose face remained calm, but whose eyes were filled with uncertainty. Alara turned to Lyra and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It will be okay, Lyra," she said softly, her voice steady. "We'll be safe now." Lyra wanted to believe her mother. She wanted to feel relief. But all she could feel was fear. Who was this man? Why had he bid so much money for her mother? And what did he want from them? The man turned to leave, and Lyra and Alara followed him through the crowd. They made their way to the exit of the auction hall, where the man's ship was waiting. It was sleek, with dark metal that shimmered in the harsh desert sun. "Come aboard," the man said, his voice low and commanding. "You'll be safe with me." Alara hesitated, glancing back at the planet's surface one last time. There was a sense of finality in the air. Lyra could feel it too. This was the moment when everything would change. She squeezed her mother's hand tightly. "Are we really safe?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Alara smiled down at her. "Yes, Lyra, we are." The man led them aboard the ship and the door closed behind them with a soft hiss. As they settled into their seats, the man didn't speak for a long time. He stared out the window, his face a mask of quiet thought. Finally, he spoke. "My name is Jarek," he said, "and I didn't bid on you for your cooking, Alara." Alara looked at him, her curiosity piqued. "Then why did you bid for me?" Jarek met her gaze, his eyes filled with a depth of experience that told her he had seen much in his life. "Because I need you, Alara. I need you to help me heal." The quiet hum of the ship's engines was the only sound that filled the cabin, as Jarek piloted them through the stars. Alara sat in a seat near the large window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Lyra, sitting beside her, stared out at the endless expanse of space, her thoughts racing. She still couldn't quite believe what had happened. A few hours ago they had been at the auction. Now they were on a ship, traveling away from everything they had ever known, with a man they didn't understand. Who was Jarek? Why had he paid so much money for her mother? His actions felt strange, like there was something more to his story than he was letting on. Alara leaned over to Lyra and whispered, "Stay close. We don't know what's going on yet, but we're safe for now." Lyra nodded but couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her stomach. The auction, the bidding, Jarek's mysterious offer, everything felt too quick, too strange. Who was this man? What did he want with them? Jarek had remained silent ever since they boarded the ship, his eyes focused on the controls in front of him. Alara had tried to start a conversation, but Jarek had only responded with short, clipped answers. His attention seemed fixed, almost as if he was waiting for something. Lyra couldn't help but stare at him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a rugged, almost unkempt appearance. His face was strong and defined, with dark eyes that seemed to see right through her. There was a hardness to him, a coldness that made her nervous. But every now and then, she caught a glimpse of something else, something softer, something hidden beneath the surface. Finally, Jarek spoke, his voice low and steady. "We'll be in hyperspace for a few hours. You can get some rest. We're headed to a safe location." Alara looked up at him. "A safe location?" she asked cautiously. "Where are we going?" "A place where you'll be safe," Jarek replied, his gaze still fixed on the controls. "I didn't buy you for your cooking, Alara. I bought you because I need you." Alara's heart skipped a beat. She had known something wasn't right, but hearing it out loud made it feel more real. "What do you need me for?" Jarek turned his head to meet her gaze. For the first time, there was a flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes. "I need you to help me heal, Alara. I've seen things that no one should have to see. I've done things I'm not proud of. I need you to help me make it right." Alara's mind raced. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but something in Jarek's voice made her hesitate. It wasn't the tone of a man who had sinister plans. It was the voice of someone who had been through something terrible, someone who was seeking redemption. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Jarek sighed deeply, his hands tightening on the controls. I was a soldier in a war, one of the worst this galaxy has ever seen. I fought for a cause that seemed just at the time, but it was all a lie. We fought for the wrong side, Alara. We were used by people who didn't care about us, about anything, but power. And now I'm left with the scars, inside and out. Alara felt a pang of sympathy for him. She had heard of the wars that had torn apart countless worlds, but she never imagined she would meet someone who had been a part of it. "And you think I can help you?" she asked, trying to understand. "I don't know," Jarek admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I need someone who can show me what it means to care again, to believe in something good. Your cooking, it's not just about the food. It's about the way you put your heart into it. I believe that's what I need, Alara. A reminder that not everything is broken." Lyra listened intently, her young mind struggling to grasp the weight of Jarek's words. She had never thought about war, never understood how it could change people so completely. But now, as she looked at Jarek, she realized that he wasn't just a stranger. They were all carrying their own burdens. Her mother, too, had been through so much. Alara, sensing the shift in the air, placed a comforting hand on Lyra's shoulder. The next few days felt like a blur for Lyra and Alara. They were still getting used to their new life on the quiet, isolated planet. The small building they had moved into was far from luxurious, but it was safe, and that was all that mattered. It was a place to breathe, to pause, and to think. Alara spent most of her time in the kitchen preparing simple meals. She had always been able to find peace in cooking. It was something she could control, something that always brought comfort, no matter the chaos around her. She had always believed that food had the power to heal, to bring people together. But now she wondered if it could help heal the man who had brought them here. Jarek had kept to himself since they arrived. He would check in on them occasionally, but he spent much of his time in the small study room, going through old documents and making calls to unknown contacts. He didn't speak much about his past, and Alara hadn't pressed him. She was learning. To live in the quiet and in the silence, she could hear the whispers of her own thoughts. One evening, after Alara had prepared a simple meal of roasted vegetables and flatbread, Jarek appeared at the door of the kitchen. He had been quiet for most of the day, his presence like a shadow that loomed over the room. But tonight something was different. There was a softness in his eyes, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. "Alara," he said, his voice low but warm. "I know this isn't much, but the meal smells incredible." Alara smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's just simple food," she replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "I didn't know what you'd like, so I kept it simple. I hope it's to your liking." Jarek stepped inside the kitchen, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm sure it will be more than enough," he said. "It's the first time I've smelled something that isn't metal or chemicals in a long time." Alara chuckled softly, but there was something behind his words that caught her attention. She had always been able to read people, to see the emotions behind their actions, and tonight Jarek seemed different. There was a vulnerability in him that she hadn't seen before. As she placed the dish on the table, Jarek sat down across from her. He didn't speak at first, just looked at the food as if it were a treasure he hadn't seen in years. His hands, rough from years of hard labor and war, hovered over the plate before he finally picked up a piece of bread. He ate slowly, savoring, each bite as though it were the first meal he had had in a long time. Alara watched him, her thoughts drifting. She could see the conflict in him, the internal battle he was fighting. She could feel the weight of the war he had fought, the scars he carried inside. But there was something else too, something she hadn't expected. Beneath the hardened exterior, beneath the walls he had built around himself, she saw a man who was hungry, not just for food, but for something more. "You know, Alara," Jarek said quietly, breaking the silence. "I've been to a lot of places in my life, I've seen a lot of things, but I never thought I'd find peace in a simple meal like this." Alara didn't know what to say. She had never thought much about the impact her cooking could have. To her, it was just food. But now she realized that it was more than that. It was a way to connect, to reach people in a way words could not. "I'm glad you like it," she replied, her voice gentle. I've always believed that food can heal in a way. It brings people together. Jarek nodded, his eyes distant for a moment. Maybe that's what I need. A way to heal. Alara could sense the weight of his words, the longing in his voice. She didn't know what he had been through, but she knew it had changed him. He wasn't just a soldier. He was someone who had lost something, someone who was searching for redemption. And now, it seemed like he was looking for it in the most unlikely place, a small kitchen, a simple meal, and the woman who had been sold to him. The evening passed in quiet conversation. They spoke of the weather on distant planets, of the best spices in the galaxy, and of memories from the past. Jarek spoke little of his war years, but when he did, his words were guarded, as though he was afraid of revealing too much. Alara didn't push him. She knew that healing couldn't be rushed, that some things took time. As the night wore on, Alara cleaned up the kitchen, her mind still turning over the conversation they had just had. She couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this than just cooking for Jarek. Was she here to help him heal, or was there something else? Lyra had stayed out of the kitchen for most of the evening, preferring to stay in her room. Alara knew that the situation was still difficult for her daughter, who had grown up in a world where they were in control of their own lives. But now, everything had changed. They were in a new place, with a man they didn't fully trust, and it wasn't easy to adjust. After cleaning the kitchen, Alara went to Lyra's room to check on her. She knocked gently on the door before opening it. Lyra was sitting on the bed, her head bent over a small book she had found in one of the rooms. Hey, sweetheart, Alara said softly, sitting beside her daughter. How are you holding up? Lyra looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. I don't know, Mom. I'm still trying to understand all of this. Alara nodded, brushing a strand of hair away from Lyra's face. No, it's a lot to take in, but we're safe here and that's what matters. I don't trust him, Mom, Lyra said, her voice quiet but firm. I don't know why he bought you. I don't know why he's being nice to us. Alara sighed, her heart aching for her daughter. She had always tried to protect Lyra from the harsh realities of the galaxy, but now she had to face them head on. I understand, sweetie. I don't fully understand him either. But for now we have to trust him. He's given us a place to stay, a chance to breathe. And maybe, just maybe, we can help him. He's been through a lot too. Lyra didn't respond, but Alara could see the doubt in her eyes. She knew that Lyra wasn't ready to trust Jarek. It would take time. But she hoped that in time, they would both see that there was more to this man than met the eye. The next morning, Alara prepared another meal, this time a dish she had made many times before, spiced stew with fresh vegetables and tender meat. She knew it wouldn't be enough to erase the pain Jarek carried, but it was a start. As she set the table, Jarek appeared in the doorway. He smiled, a small but genuine smile, and walked over to the table. Thank you, he said simply, sitting down. I didn't expect anything so comforting. Alara smiled back, her heart warming. Maybe, just maybe, she could help this man find the peace he was searching for. But one thing was certain, she wasn't just cooking for Jarek anymore. She was cooking for herself too, for the future, for the hope that they could all find healing, together. The days continued to pass quietly on the small, isolated planet. Alara and Lyra were slowly adjusting to their new life. It wasn't easy. They had both been through so much. Captured, auctioned off, and now living in an unfamiliar place with a man they didn't fully trust. But there was something about the simplicity of their new routine that brought them a sense of peace. The days were slow, and the silence was comforting. Alara spent most of her time in the kitchen, cooking meals for Jarek. At first, she wasn't sure what to expect from him. But as time went on, she noticed something changing in him. The man who had seemed distant and closed off at first was now opening up. He would sit with her during meals, sharing bits and pieces of his past, though never too much. He would ask her about her life before all of this, before the auction, and she would answer, carefully avoiding the painful parts. It was strange. In the midst of all their confusion, they were beginning to form a bond. Ilara had always believed in the power of food to bring people together, but she hadn't expected it to be the thing that would bring her closer to Jarek. Every meal she prepared seemed to bring him a little bit more out of his shell. He would smile more, talk more, and for the first time in a long while, Ilara felt like she was seeing the man behind the tough exterior. One evening, as they sat down to another meal, Ilara noticed that Jarek seemed more relaxed than usual. He had been quieter than usual in the past few days, but tonight he looked like he was truly enjoying the meal. "This is good," he said after taking a bite of the stew. "Really good. I can't remember the last time I had something that tasted like this." Ilara smiled softly, feeling a small sense of pride. "It's nothing special. Just some spices I picked up." Jarek shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You don't just cook, you put something into your food. It's hard to explain, but it's like you're feeding more than just the body. You're feeding something deeper." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. It wasn't often that someone recognized what she put into her cooking. For her, food had always been about more than just filling a stomach. It was about connection, about sharing a piece of yourself with the people around you. As they ate, Jarek seemed to grow more thoughtful. His eyes were distant, and Ilara could tell that he was thinking about something important. She decided not to press him. She had learned that pushing Jarek to open up too much only made him retreat further into himself. "I didn't think I'd ever have a meal like this again," Jarek said quietly, breaking the silence. "I thought I'd forgotten what it felt like to truly sit down and eat with someone. It's nice." Ilara's heart softened. It was moments like this that reminded her why she had agreed to come with him in the first place. Despite ever, the quiet peace that had settled over Ilara and Lyra's new life began to feel like a fragile thing. The days were simple, days filled with cooking, eating, and sharing conversations. But beneath the surface, Ilara couldn't ignore the quiet tension that lingered. It wasn't just the silence between her and Jarek, though. There was still much he hadn't shared with her. It wasn't just the growing unease she saw in Lyra's eyes, though that too had grown as the days passed. It was something else. Jarek was still distant at times, lost in thoughts that he wouldn't share. There were moments when his gaze would drift to the farthest corners of the room, his brow furrowing as if there were something he was holding back, something he was keeping to himself. Ilara didn't press him. She had learned over the past few weeks that pushing Jarek too hard only made him retreat further into himself. But as much as she didn't want to, she knew that something was coming, something that would make things harder for all of them. One evening, just as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over their small home, Jarek's face became even more tense than usual. Ilara watched him closely from the kitchen as she stirred a pot of soup. She had learned to recognize the signs. His posture stiffened, his hands clenched, and his eyes grew colder. "What's wrong?" she asked softly, not turning around from the stove. She didn't want to seem like she was prying, but she couldn't ignore the change in the air. Jarek didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at the wall, his jaw tightening as though he was fighting a battle within himself. Finally, he exhaled deeply, pushing himself away from the chair where he had been sitting. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and uncertain. "But it's not going to be easy." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her, and she knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. "Go ahead," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm, though her mind raced with possibilities. Jarek hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a voice that was almost a whisper. "There are people who are looking for you, Ilara. People who know exactly who you are, and they're not going to stop until they find you." Ilara froze, her hand stilling over the pot. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The words felt like a blow to her chest. She had hoped, prayed even, that they could leave their past behind. that they could escape the dangers of their former life. But it seemed like the galaxy wasn't ready to let them go so easily. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "They're part of a larger group," Jarek said, his eyes filled with regret. "A group that has been watching you for a long time. They know about your skills, about what you can do with food, and they want you for more than just your cooking. They want to use you." Alara felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She didn't understand. "Use me," she repeated, her voice shaking. "For what?" Jarek's gaze softened and he took a step closer to her. "I didn't know about them at first. When I brought you here, I thought I was protecting you. But I was wrong. I didn't realize the danger you were in. The people I work for, they've been watching me for years, and they know about you, about what you can do with your cooking." Alara felt a pang of fear, but she kept her voice steady. "You knew about this? You knew they were coming after me?" "I didn't know," Jarek replied quickly. "I swear I didn't. But now I do. And I can't just let them take you. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." Alara's thoughts were spinning. She had always known there were people out there who wanted to take advantage of her skills. She had seen it in the way others had treated her over the years. But she had never imagined it would come to this. She had thought that she and Lyra had escaped that life for good. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you warn me?" Jarek's eyes darkened and he looked away as though he was ashamed. "I didn't know how to. I didn't want to put you in danger, and I didn't want you to see me as someone who was just using you. I've spent so many years running from the truth, Alara. I didn't know how to face it." Alara felt a wave of anger wash over her, mixing with the fear that had taken hold of her. She felt betrayed, though she knew it wasn't entirely Jarek's fault. He hadn't known. He had been trying to protect them in his own way, but it didn't change the fact that they were still in danger. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore," Alara said, her voice quiet but firm. "You've kept so much from me. How can I trust you to protect us now?" Jarek's expression tightened. "I know I've made mistakes, but I promise you, Alara, I'm not the enemy. I'm trying to fix this. I'm trying to make up for what I've done." There was a long silence between them, and Alara's heart ached. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But the truth was, she didn't know who she could trust anymore. They were surrounded by shadows, enemies she couldn't see, forces she didn't understand. Finally, Alara spoke, her voice raw. "What do we do now?" Jarek's gaze met hers, and for the first time in a long while, there was no hint of defensiveness in his eyes. "We fight," he said simply. "We fight back, Alara. We don't let them take you. And I'll make sure of that." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. There was no turning back now. The threat had been revealed, and Alara knew that the peaceful life they had started to build was about to shatter. But despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, there was a part of her that felt a spark of hope. Jarek had finally opened up to her. He had finally admitted the truth. And though they had a long way to go, maybe, just maybe, they could face whatever came next together. Later that night, after the conversation had ended, Alara lay awake in bed staring up at the ceiling. Lyra had fallen asleep beside her, the soft rise and fall of her chest a small comfort in the chaos that had descended upon them. Alara's mind was racing. There was no way to prepare for what was coming. The people who were after her were powerful, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But one thing was clear. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't facing this fight by herself. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to survive. The next few days felt like a storm waiting to break. Alara and Lyra were no longer just hiding from their past. They were preparing for a battle they hadn't fully understood until now. The danger was real, and Jarek had confirmed it. The people looking for her were ruthless, and they weren't going to give up easily. They knew what Alara could do, what her cooking could do, and they would stop at nothing to get her back. Jarek had spent the last few days gathering information, trying to learn more about the group that was after them. He had been making calls, speaking to people who owed him favors and gathering every scrap of information he could find. But even with all his resources, Ilara could see the worry in his eyes. This wasn't something he had ever planned for, and he was still learning how to protect them. It was the morning of the 6th day since Jarek had revealed the truth to Ilara, and they were all sitting at the table for breakfast. Ilara had prepared a simple meal, scrambled eggs with herbs, fresh bread, and fruit. It was nothing fancy, but it was the kind of meal that brought them together. As they ate in silence, Ilara could feel the tension building between them, the weight of the choices, a head pressing down on her. Lyra was unusually quiet. Her bright eyes were fixed on her plate, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. Ilara knew her daughter was scared. She could see it in the way she fidgeted with her food, the way she glanced at the door as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "Mom," Lyra said softly, breaking the silence. "Do you think we'll be safe here forever?" Ilara's heart ached at the question. She had hoped that they could escape the past, that they could find a peaceful life away from everything. But she knew the truth now. There was no escaping their past. There was only surviving it. "I don't know, sweetie," Ilara said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But I do know that we have to stay strong. We have to stick together." Jarek, who had been quietly eating at the end of the table, looked up at them. His expression was grim, his eyes hard. "I've been doing everything I can to protect us, but the truth is we're running out of time. The people who are after you, Ilara, they're closing in. They won't stop until they get what they want." Ilara felt a chill run through her. She had known this day would come, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. They were out of time. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. She wasn't afraid. She had made it this far. She had survived for years on her own. But now the stakes were higher than ever. Her daughter was at risk. Jarek was at risk. And she couldn't afford to lose either of them. Jarek pushed his plate aside and stood up. "We fight back," he said, his voice low but filled with determination. "We can't keep running. We have to face them head on." Ilara stood up too. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was different. The danger was bigger than anything she had ever faced. These weren't just some random people looking for her cooking. These were powerful, dangerous people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice filled with doubt. "We're not fighters, Jarek. We're just ordinary people. How can we possibly stand up to them?" Jarek's eyes hardened. "We don't have to fight like soldiers," he said, "but we have to fight smart. We